Shefali Bhatt is an award winning journalist with an expansive career spanning organizations like the Hindustan Times, the Times of India, Live Mint, and the Economic Times. She has written over the years on a wide variety of subjects, including topics like culture, media, ethics, and identity. Today, she's here to argue that you cannot and should not separate art from its artist. As always, I push back, and I hope you enjoy listening. Hi, Shefali. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Deepak. Thank you for having me.
Um, we met in Bangalore,
Yes.
and over a cup of coffee, I was having hot chocolate.
Mm.
I was trying to figure out, is there something that you believe in deeply?
Mm.
And I know you to be somebody who has many deep beliefs about various subjects, but somehow coincidentally, usually we catch guests, or I catch guests in the flavor of their moment, right? You said, look, I've been thinking recently about how I think that art and artist are not separable. And you had a few conversations about it recently and all that. I really never thought about this topic, okay, prior to when you and I spoke about this. Maybe only intellectually, but as like just somewhere in the back of my mind, this topic exists. And I have somewhat of an answer, but nothing serious. One of my favorite pieces of poetry is If by Kipling. Now, I read the poem for the first time when I was in school. I was very impressionable, very young. And if you can fill the unforgiving minute, 60 seconds worth distance,
Go for
then
it.
yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. And for some reason, like that just stuck with me, and the entire poem is about this very stoic outlook to life. And it's been a helpful poem to have in my head through life. I've never Googled whether Kipling is a problematic person prior to our conversation. And then in prepping for this, I said, okay, let me go down the Kipling rabbit hole.
Oh, wow.
And I'd read Recessional before, which is a poem that he'd written, but never appreciated what was behind it. But turns out he was quite large on imperialism. Wrote The White Man's Burden, which was about how the white man has the burden of having to deliver imperialism and the modern way of life and the church to these half-devil, half-children in countries like ours, like India.
Wow, TIL.
Yeah. And so there's a particular paragraph in Recessional which stands out, which is, if drunk with sight of power we lose wild tongues that have not thee in awe, such boastings as the Gentiles use, that's us, or lesser breeds without the law. Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. And upon reading that, I said, what does this do to my appreciation of If? Right? This poem that is so seminal, at least to me, as a character building sort of piece of art.
So what does it do?
That's a good question, right? And I don't often answer yet, because as part of the format, I'm just a vessel to disagree with the guest, right? It's not like I'm talking about what Deepak believes in. It's just that I disagree with the guest. But I'd love to understand, who is Shefali and how did you come to this? Most people don't. Most people don't think about this. I didn't. Most people I've met haven't thought about this. So maybe it's the journalistic background. Maybe it's just your interest in the arts and literature. But how did you come to this place of belief that these are intertwined things, art and artist?
Yeah, I was wondering, I think the immediate answer that I would think of would be that it's probably a function of the world I inhabit, which is journalism. Journalism becomes your lifestyle. It's not just a profession, I think, after a certain point. And therefore, these are questions that we are dealing with on a more frequent basis than most other people in the world around us, perhaps. But I don't think that's just it, Deepak. I think for me, every time I'm consuming art, I just feel grateful to be alive. I think art evokes that out of you, right? It makes you feel like, wow, I can't believe I am able to experience this. Like, what a joy it is to be able to experience good art. And therefore, I think that art is so special because it evokes that softer part of you, that celebration of what it is to be human, to be able to feel, which was another thing that I told you about, right? Like, I feel, therefore I am human. And um and I think therefore a lot of us, I would believe, are very curious about the artist. And so when you consume something, and I'm also, I think, fascinated by what happens behind the scene, who's the person or the people or the machinery behind the scene that brings out that art alive, that makes you feel grateful to be alive. And therefore you then go and read up about the person or the people behind the art that you consumed. And then there is a part of you that wants to find some sort of alignment with the art and the artist, if that makes sense. You want to be able to see that, okay, this is how this art made me feel, and I somehow want that artist to maybe have some aspect of their being that is also very similar to, that evokes the same emotion within me, that makes me
Hmm.
feel like, yeah, I get it. It makes this make sense, that this person has produced this, or I just want to know more about the person who has been able to create this art. So there is, I feel that as a consumer of art, you are more often than not deeply fascinated by the artist behind it and how that artist's mind works, and you want to believe that the artist is as great as the art, um, if not greater than the art that they have produced. And somehow you realize that no artist is perfect because no human being is perfect, and therefore I think there is that appreciation of art created by a human versus art created by a machine or AI, right? Because there is beauty in imperfection, because that is what makes it human. And so you kind of start off with the bare minimum assumption that this is a flawed human being. I think I think where I believe it's important to sort of look at who the artist is and what that artist represents. Uh, it's important for you to know that. At least it's important for me to know that, because if that artist does not evoke the same emotion in you, I think somewhere you feel cheated. You feel like the artist has the ability not to make you feel alive but to manipulate you. And as a writer, I know that, right? We do that to a large extent almost every week. I mean, as a long form writer, I do write a long form piece almost every week. And when you're trying to sort of, you have everything in your head, and you start off by thinking, okay, this is a mess, I need to make sense of this mess. But slowly while you're making sense of that mess, you also, in a way, when you're trying to tweak things and bring up one line that was said, and bring it out at the end, because you know that this just goes better. Like even in our conversation, right, there might be, if you were to actually bring this out in a written format, you have the liberty to actually move things around in a
Hmm.
way that just might make it better than what this feels like, right? And that is it
Manipulative.
is manipulative. And so when you are an artist judging somebody else's art, you know that there is a fair bit of harmless manipulation that goes into bringing art alive, because it creates that, you want to create that aha moment. Now, where I feel that that manipulation becomes unacceptable to me is when I know that the intent behind that manipulation is malicious, and not just to sort of woo you, but to sort of woo you to the extent that you refuse to see the malicious parts of me, where I'm going to create art so good that you are willing to overlook parts of me that are bad. And I wonder if that is also something that artists kind of prey on, which is that um, I have the ability to create art that moves you so much that you might just let go of the fact that I'm actually a horrible person. And I am not able to sort of overlook that. And that is why I think this is something that means so much to me, because then I don't just feel manipulated in a way that makes me feel like, oh, well done. Like I see what you did there and I like that. Then it makes me feel like you are trying to capitalize on my innate need to be moved as a human being. Um, and that just makes me feel used.
It's deceptive.
Yeah. It feels like a betrayal, because it feels like, I think, therefore, basically, harmless manipulation versus malicious manipulation is where I feel that I feel it's important to kind of draw the line between the two. I am okay to accept harmless manipulation, and I don't want to be okay with malicious manipulation.
This is interesting. It's also novel. I've not, all my reading, I've not heard somebody phrase it this way.
Mm.
So this I love now. This is a nice rabbit hole to go down. Um, before I address the art question, does this cover anything outside of art? So, for example, I remember reading. It's not about the bicycle. I think that's the name of the book by what's his name, Armstrong, the cyclist who Tour de France winner, I think 7-11, some crazy number of Tour de France winners. And in the book, he's emphatically claiming that he has never used performance-enhancing drugs of any sort. And I read the book just a week or two prior to when he went on opera and ultimately confessed that he did use performance-enhancing drugs, lost all the medals. Okay. And I think I had that feeling that you have, which is that when I read the book, I said, this guy's incredible. Like this amount of dedication to the sport is just superhuman and worth emulating, worth putting on an altar, right? There's a pedestal that deservedly this person stands on because he's dedicated his life to cycling. And so when he makes that emphatic claim in the book that I do not use performance-enhancing drugs and this is a result of my quote-unquote natural abilities, whatever that is, and I believe him. And then he comes out and says that that's not the case. I feel really deceived and let down. And in my notes too, I spoke about Kasparov, who plays incredible chess, one of the greatest chess players ever, but was problematic in the way that he thought women could never play chess like men. Right? In fact, And I think when Polga beat him in chess for the first time is when I think a lot of this started changing. He's since apologized, changed his views, whatever. But I can't seem to pull away from the appreciation I have for the games, right? Like he's still art on the chessboard, just like Armstrong is art on the bicycle.
Yeah.
So do you feel like this is limited to things like poetry and movies and stuff like that? Or do you feel like the world of sports, I don't know, the world of science and math, like there could be mathematicians who come up with entirely novel papers that advance our thinking about math, physics, right, how the universe operates, but maybe problematic people in their own personal lives. Do you feel like the deception carries through there also? Like these people are using their excellence in those things, the sports, the sciences, etc., and that as a mask to sort of offer this deception up, right? Like that they're still being deceitful in a similar way.
Oh, 100%. Because the purpose of art is to move you, right? So there's like how they say in India, there's this catchphrase, right? Cricket and cinema, these are two religions, and these are two things that move us the most. And cricket is art, cycling is art, and playing chess is art, in the sense that when you are an audience to each of these sport, for you this is art, right? And that's why when people sort of wax eloquent about someone sort of getting that very difficult catch, or I'm not too familiar with the terminology within cycling and chess, and therefore I will stick to cricket, which is more familiar to me comparatively.
Sure.
But all of this is art, and therefore when you find out that this was not just a human with their sort of sheer dint of labor and hard work and grit who's been able to manage to create that artful experience for us to consume and for them to experience, you do feel a fair bit of betrayal there as well. It's the same as how we now feel about AI slop, right? Like a lot of people have started to very openly comment on certain writers' posts saying that, okay, this looks like ChatGPT wrote this and not you. And I preferred your writing before this. And, you were a good writer before this and it was original. Why do you have to resort to ChatGPT? And it's the same. Performance enhancement drugs are kind of, I mean, they AI, I guess, is the leg up after performance enhancement drugs in that field. So it's the same as how people feel when they notice that something that they were hoping is completely natural, because your reaction is not like, you don't have a chip inside of you, right? That has that reaction is pure. And therefore when you find out that there was some impurities and some level of adulteration that went into bringing out that pure reaction in you, it kind of, I think it takes away from your reaction, and therefore you feel that the euphoria that you felt in that moment was engineered. And I think that's not an entirely good feeling. Again, I think it just all goes back to a certain way we feel when we consume great art. And then when we find out something in the background of that, it somehow makes us feel that, are you telling me that I need to nullify that feeling that is so precious? And I think that just makes a part of you a bit, I wouldn't say angry, but just low-key annoyed, because why are you taking this away from me? I think it's that expectation that you have from art being pure, because the reaction that you have to it is pure. And so it just basically expectation, it just misalignment with what you're expecting, that art would have sort of what would have gone into sort of making that art. Having said that, there are thresholds to that as well, right? We are I do get this question often from people as to, do you use AI? And you will see in a lot of our fields where people will say that, I don't think I'm using it enough, and I don't think I'm using it to the best of my abilities, because AI is a tool. Performance enhancement drugs aren't. But so that's, I think, that's a clear sort of demarcation, because we as an audience are expecting you to be entirely human, and then show us that your human capabilities are magical. And when we find out that you've actually taken performance enhancement drugs to create that magical experience, then you basically know the trick behind that magic, right? And then it's not magical anymore, then it's actually just a trick. And but then and that brings me to the second part of what I wanted to sort of argue here, which is that there are thresholds there. I don't think that disappointment is as much, at least for me, because maybe I have a certain distance from sport. Although I should at this point mention that after a certain, I think this was the that last final World Cup match between Australia and New Zealand, was it? No, England and New Zealand.
I know as much about cricket as you about cycling.
Okay, so this is the Ben Stokes moment. I'm feeling terrible about the fact that all of my friends who are cricket aficionados are going to hate me for this. But there was this one basically final match where Ben Stokes was batting, I guess, and it went into one of those like sort of over one final over after all the overs are over, because these folks needed to decide who is winning.
Right.
And we were really rooting for New Zealand, because I think it just felt like this is New Zealand's game and New Zealand ought to win, and New Zealand did not. And I remember for a brief moment on Wikipedia also, it was updated that England won this by sheer chance of luck.
Mm.
And I remember I felt so bad after watching that match. I have not watched a cricket match since then. This was clearly 2-3 years ago that World Cup final happened, or maybe more than that. I think this was before the pandemic. So this was clearly like 5-6 years ago, and I have not watched a cricket match since then. So that far ago that I have actually forgotten most of these details at this point. But that's what art is kind of supposed to evoke inside of you, right? Make you feel that strongly that you say, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can put myself through this much of roller coaster of feeling, and then to sort of feel disappointed so bad that you need 2 days to recover from it. And then when you find out that, okay, there was we're all humans, right? And so we are expecting that kind of magic. You just appreciate it in a certain way when you know that here's another human being like me. There is some similarity between us, and yet this person is exceptional in these ways, and that makes you want to marvel at just the possibilities of a human being. And when you find out that there is some sort of machine work that has gone into it, it mellows that feeling of magic that made you feel, and then you feel cheated.
I can relate.
Yeah.
I understand where this comes from.
Yeah.
I want to try and draw a distinction between two kinds of deception. Okay, so The first is, and in fact, in my previous examples, I think I gave an example of both, which is probably unfair. So the first is somebody who is deceptive in a way that impacts the art directly. That is, it's a great piece of literature, but you find out that it was written with GPT. Yeah. So the person is deceptive. There is something immoral in the way that they have behaved. But the immorality is a part of the art that you have consumed directly.
I think in that case, it's not immoral using ChatGPT or any AI, LLM to basically create something. If it's still, like, the person would argue it's still my idea. I have just used ChatGPT in a way. Sort of say, maybe this person could argue that you would use ghostwriters because these are my ideas, but I'm not as eloquent as a writer, or I don't have the time to sit and write and then use Flourish and just structure it a certain way. So I used a ghostwriter, which is a fairly acceptable practice. And the person could argue this, and which is a fair argument, by the way, that one could buy into, because I also know as an artist myself that sometimes it's just these are lines, right? Like, you're putting in data into an Excel, and then Excel gives you a bunch of options in terms of, okay, you can get a pie chart, you can get a bar graph, or you can get a line graph from it, and whatever looks more appealing to you and whatever you think would be more appealing and comprehensive to the reader, you pick that. So you are taking, a lot of us in a lot of ways are taking help from living or non-living tools to better our art.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Then let me pick a slightly different example, right? Take Picasso as an example. Again, in researching this, I ended up learning that Mary Therese, who is part of a lot of his paintings and was a partner, was 17 when he met her, and he was 50.
Yeah.
And those works are incredible. Like, they're so beautiful to look at.
Yeah.
And then I remember just sort of going on Google Images and looking at it with now this newfound information, right? And that changed the way I look at those pieces. I don't know how exactly, but it certainly does. Okay, so I'm just saying
Hannah
that
Gadsby talks a great length about this, and that's how I got to know about this in the first place. So Nanette, she talks about not just Picasso, but a lot of other sort of painters from that era, and just how obnoxious those people were in real. And then it's like this. I love mentioning the concept of Baader-Meinhof, right? That German concept, which loosely translates to, or I'm just simplifying it. That's not exactly what it means, but basically when you first find something out, discover something that has always existed, and then you basically see it everywhere. It's not like you're now seeing it everywhere. There is no sort of universe sort of making you see it. It's just that you're more aware of it, and therefore you're noticing it everywhere, but it was always there.
Understood. Yeah. So the point I'm making with this is that knowing that the person in this great piece of art is a minor, right? And let's say there was sexual misconduct, for example, right, that took place. Then that category of deception is one where the art that you are directly looking at or consuming or appreciating is woven into the indiscretion itself, or the morality itself. That's category one. Category two is that the person has performed some sort of an immoral act that is not related to the piece of art. And so, I mean, this person made an incredible movie, won an Oscar, whatever, but in a separate life murdered somebody, right? Or was like a great musician, but also a murderer. Now, these are not things that are directly correlated, as in the art itself does not have an aspect of that that act. Do you treat these as separate in some way?
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned Picasso, because some of the examples that I wanted to touch upon, the ones that I feel strongly and very clearly about, Picasso is one of them, Woody Allen is another, Neil Gaiman in recent times is the third. And I also want to therefore, within this realm, talk about just the veracity of these claims that come up. Remember that the art moves us first. And then we find out after a certain point, because the artist has become that famous, that it is important for other people to tell you about who they were as a person. And then when that happens, because you're curious about the artist, I feel that at the back of the victim or the survivor's mind, there is this anger that people are getting to see a certain side of this person that they are celebrating, not knowing that this person has violated me repeatedly. And therefore, after a certain point is when you get to know, okay, there is this side to the artist that I have celebrated as well, whose art has moved me in the past. Now, what happens when when that um, claim comes to your knowledge. One, I think in my mind, I tend to first, like okay, let's take these three examples: Woody Allen, Picasso, Neil Gaiman. I was actually reading a Neil Gaiman book at the time that the Neil Gaiman piece came out,
Hmm.
uh, late last year. um, I threw that book in the bin a few days after. I thought about it for a few days and then I threw it in the bin. By then, he had already denied all of those claims. Um, I haven't particularly cared about Picasso's paintings. Uh, but yeah, I think before knowing all of those things about Picasso, if I would have gone to an art gallery in Paris and seen Picasso's work, I would have been like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I see why this guy was celebrated so much. Um, I have seen and loved Woody Allen's movies. So these are the three examples in terms of my involvement with the art behind, and then therefore what, um, how that makes me, the intensity of my feeling towards the artist because of my involvement with the art. So I told you about my reaction to Neil Gaiman's book, right? So which was like a very visceral reaction of the art that I had that came from the artist, which is disconnected because this was a children's book.
Hmm.
I did not want that book around me because it became a reminder of, okay, a person who may or may not have done those things that were alleged. I did not, up until now, speak about the fact that I did this. So that was a very personal reaction. I did not feel the need to actually go out in the open and say that I have done this, much less say that you should do it. With Picasso, while there is no involvement with the art whatsoever, if I see someone celebrating this guy in public, I would feel maybe the urge to tell this person in private or in public, depending on uh, how much bandwidth I have mentally on that day to engage with someone publicly. I would like for them to know, hey, by the way, this is also what is being said in history about this person whose art seems to evoke a certain emotion in you. And then I will leave it to you to decide. With Woody Allen, I don't feel like watching his movies again. Again, he has also denied most of the allegations against him of sexual misconduct. So I think it's maybe it's also the higher your involvement with the art or the more it has moved you, I think the feeling of betrayal also feels stronger. While at the same time, one has to kind of understand that there is a 1% chance in the world um, that some of these allegations could actually
Be false.
be false. But like I had told you initially, being a woman, you also weigh these things in your mind and think, you put yourself in the other person's shoes and you realize that for somebody to basically take the mic and tell a room full of fans that the person that you idolize is a shit show, it takes an immense amount of courage, not just because you'll have to face the wrath of these people who are probably blind fans, um, but also because then you as a person become reduced to that for the rest of your life. And I know for a fact that a lot of people stay quiet about, uh, especially in case of sexual misconduct of a lot of celebrated people, because they don't want to be reduced to that allegation that they made, no matter how a certain section of society may call them brave. um, you also realize that bravery is exhausting, and therefore I think in a lot of these things you just go with your gut, and then I think it's a flow chart in your head which moves real fast. Like I don't think that computation happens very slowly, but there is a part of your brain, I think, that's constantly just deciding, okay, what is the extent to which I want to engage with the art in front of the artist, because it's always art in the front, right? And then the artist comes up front. And then once you get to see certain aspects of this artist that you probably wished, weren't true, you have this need to then sort of take the artist again in the backdrop, because it's the art that started the relationship first, right? You wanted to have a parasocial relationship with the artist because of the art. So now you're questioning your relationship with the art and deciding what kind of a relationship I want with the art. And I think that is what's important, and that's where I think I have some very clear sort of rules in my head, which I don't feel necessary to impose on people around me, but I have these rules. So I will not watch a Woody Allen movie because of how the allegations made me feel, and what I drew from it, and would be good if at some point I find out, and I'm convinced by the argument that no, these were actually false allegations. At this point, it doesn't feel like that to me, and therefore my decision is to not engage with his art altogether. um, and therefore, if I'm not engaging, then obviously there's no question of celebrating. With Picasso, I am okay to consume that art, but I will not celebrate it. And if I'm seeing someone else celebrate it, I might also just make them cognizant of some parts of this artist that they may not know of. Um, with Neil Gaiman, I guess it goes a step further, right? Where you know that you will also not recommend that. I think that is something that, yeah, sure. So I guess in each of these cases, I will definitely not recommend this art to anybody else, even if it is something that fits their need at that point. I will try and find a different example. So yeah. So once you actually find out some of these things, that is the flowchart in your mind where you, and it's also kind of ongoing, because some of the uh, it's very need based also. If somebody is talking about a certain example, and you immediately think of a Woody Allen movie and a certain dialogue or a scene that kind of fits in well, you will probably sort of in that moment decide, do I want to invoke this art at this point when I know this is something about the artist and how that has made me feel? And then in your mind you will think of, okay, no, I know this is the best example I'm thinking of, let me find another example. Because I
Wow, that's
know,
really interesting.
yeah, because because see, it's also, you're also therefore then taking care of your own feelings about that art, because when you're recalling art, you're also reliving how that moment made you feel. But now that is kind of colored, right? Because now that, and that is the problem with the whole feeling so strongly about the art and the artist, is that this person has taken away that feeling from you, or the joy of that feeling. Because now it's just very, now you're very nonplussed about that feeling. Like, do I feel okay about the fact that this brought joy to me, when it, when there is so much of an ugly backstory behind the artist that brought that feeling out. And therefore I don't want to relive that confusion inside of me when I'm narrating that to somebody else, as an example.
That is so interesting. So, if I was to draw like a little spectrum, okay, on one side you have just strict formalism. Somebody who says that all art must be critiqued only in a silo, that the context of who or where the art comes from is not relevant to the art itself. And here I'm trying to think of what would be an easy way to get entrance into defending something like this, right? Like somebody who plays the piano masterfully, yeah, you can objectively claim that mastery is a 10 on 10. Like, it's so hard to play, but so beautifully placed when you hear it. That the technical mastery is objective. Sure, like the listening to it or looking at a painting, etc., you may subjectively feel some way or the other. But if I was an award committee who was trying to decide which of the following 10 pieces of piano instrumentals deserves an award, I can objectively claim one of these is so incredibly hard to play, would have certainly taken 20 years of skill, that this is the person who's supposed to win this award. So you have criticism from a formal lens of looking at the art sans any other context.
Yeah.
On the other side, you have moralism, right? Like just saying that all art is only contextual to who, what, when, where, why. It matters what the environment around them was. It matters who these people are. And all of that inevitably feeds into the art, because, and I feel like what you're saying is that like the art is like a vessel. It's a vessel for so many things. it has in it a little bit of paint or some words or some sounds, whatever. But in it is also you, the viewer, the consumer. In it is the artist who poured themselves into it, and it's a vessel for so much that you can't escape moralism. Okay, so what I'm going to try and do as part of the format is push for both, right? So I want to start on the formalism bit. You're part of an award committee that's trying to decide which piano instrumental wins, right? And you're a great pianist, so you have good sense of why something is technically difficult. Do you still give out an award to the person who has the hardest piece or the most intricate piece, despite what they may have done in their personal life? And this is the celebration question.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And sometimes I don't think I've publicly said this, but I'm very wary of doing profiles of as a journalist. I am okay doing interviews because that's very theme based and that's Q&A, right? You can, even though if it is running copy, which is like a term we use for an interview, but you're basically interspersing their quotes within a story that you are sort of telling the reader. And Q&A is more straightforward, right? Profile is where, unless it's of a controversial figure itself, profile is where you kind of telling the backstory about someone, letting people see the human behind a name. I am very wary of that. I have become very wary of doing profiles after October 2018, which is when India, at least urban digital India, had its own version of the Me Too movement, largely that began on Twitter. And a bunch of very celebrated men were called out. And even before that, I think, I know this one media person, content creator, producer who was called out. I had interviewed their mother for a particular series that I had done, and I just particularly regretted doing that, because to my mind, you're not only you kind of celebrating this person by telling the world a little bit about where they come from and things that are largely celebratory in nature. And then you have not one, not two, but like 5 people from different sort of disconnected people actually coming on record to say that, okay, this person was sexually inappropriate with me. And then you feel cheated, you feel deceived, you feel that you weren't able to see this person for what they really were, and got taken in by what they had produced. And you also platformed this person and their celebration, and you basically contributed to their celebration further. I think I forgot your question, even though this...
No. So if objectively that is technical mastery, should we reward that?
So I guess, I was answering your question by way of this example. Sometimes you feel angry at the fact that you didn't know any better. And therefore, in this particular example, if I already have this backstory, I think I will very strongly mention that to the bench for them to make up their minds. And because for me, it is, I cannot separate the art from the artist, which I'm very clear about. I think that will affect my decision for sure. I will not judge someone else if it doesn't affect their decision, if they are able to see the two as two distinct entities. But I feel that I would not want to platform someone, and it also depends on what kind of misconduct or immorality we are talking about. Someone taking performance enhancement drugs just makes you feel like, kya yaar? Like, I was thinking that this is all human. Now I'm finding out that this is human plus machine, and it just makes me feel like that joy has reduced a little. It just but it doesn't overturn that feeling when I find out that there is someone who's created magic in the form of art, and I get to know the trick behind it. That just makes that magic not remain magic but trickery, right? But if I know that magician has been sexually inappropriate with someone, has violated someone, has done anything criminal, not just immoral, then obviously it's not just trickery, right? Because then I think it is impossible for me to separate the art from the artist. So I think in this particular context, in the example that the case study that you put forth, it is important for me to understand what is the level of the information that I have on this person, and how much does that affect me. If it is just at the level of trickery, yeah, maybe I would just be like, okay, sure, maybe it'll just lose 1 point from me, and I will let other people know, and then everyone can decide, and then whatever is the score, that kind of wins. You also can't award, if you're deciding on the art, there will be other people on the bench who will also argue that we are here to celebrate who has the best art and not who's the best artist, right? And
Yes.
I think I need to have a good answer to that question. So I am not there to reward the best human being who has created art. I am there to reward the art, but then it is complicated because eventually it's not the art that's winning, right? It's the artist behind it that's winning.
Correct. You don't give an
So
award to
yeah,
a painting.
it's not the yeah, I mean, painting is not the human, right? It's the human who is eventually collecting all the accolades. So it is tricky. So you will basically, therefore, in that moment, decide that this is going to lose certain points from me for sure, because it is important to me who the artist is behind the art. And then you again decide how many points it loses basis what is the thing that you know about them. And then if it is something completely immoral or unacceptable to my moral standpoint, then I would just say that I refuse to vote on this person, because I don't think I want to review art of a person who has this kind of moral conduct.
Here's one interesting way to approach this. Yeah, like let's say it was truly double blind in the sense that you are listening to. I'm going to use music because it's an easy one here, like a guitar solo or an instrumental piece of piano music. But you don't know who has produced that. In effect, you have headphones on and you listen to 10 pieces back to back. You grade them, rate them, and then the piece that wins. I'm saying that the formalists, like somebody who is appreciating art for art's sake, will just say that is the only fair way to judge art.
That is why we say ignorance is bliss, no?
It may not be ignorance insofar as it may be
obliviousness.
What is on the score sheet. That is, there may be a column for, I don't know, pace and cadence. There may be a column for hitting the right notes, whatever. I know nothing about music, so I'm clearly missing the mark.
Unfortunately, the artist's moral conduct is not something that you.
How does one
rate.
even score this? Because I feel like this is so emotionally charged and private and personal that we will all feel differently about that. But on all the objective markers, we can agree. And I think what I'm trying to get to is that inevitably we will keep celebrating artists who produce great art with almost no regard for, because this may happen in completely separate silos. So you may see the Oscars reward great artists for their art, and then you will see society, right, and just regular citizens on social media or journalists go after artists for what they have done outside of that specific art. And that may actually be the right way to go about this. Like, I'm thinking about whether the outrage is best placed in popular culture, in public spaces. And then when it comes to the gradation of art, we are explicitly saying, this is the right way to do it. Actually is double blind. You put on headphones, listen to music. I won't even tell you who wrote it, and let's reward art for art. And these should be separate worlds. They still get what they have coming. It just doesn't come from the person grading the art.
Yeah, I think, but at the end of the day, Deepak, we're all humans, right? Like, as someone who's then platforming that art in a way, because I'm awarding it, I am platforming it because I am celebrating it, and I am urging you to celebrate it. And then when I find out that this is the artist behind that art, I think I will feel responsible for said. I don't know about anyone else. I will feel responsible for said platforming and urging people to celebrate it. And I don't think that's a feeling that I will like. I therefore feel that I would want to be more responsible, and would it work? Would it be great to kind of just not know anything problematic about any of the artists because we like their art so much? Sure. But ultimately it all just it's kind of, then it just gets into that endless loop of, at some point you're going to find it, right? And then you're going to feel like shit. At least if you have a moral compass. If you just don't care a damn about anything, then yeah, I'm guessing that's a great way to live. But how, I don't know if that is my way to live. I want to feel, and I appreciate honesty, and I appreciate people wanting to do right to the best of their abilities, and people not violating other people because they have the power to, and they feel that there will not be any consequences to their actions. And therefore it is necessary for me to actually have context, some context.
I have an interesting question here. I didn't know if I wanted to bring this up because I couldn't think of the right place to bring it in, but I feel this is. M.F. Hussain painted the goddess Lakshmi naked, right? And there will be many in this country, there certainly were, who of M.F. Hussain or of Salman Rushdie, because he wrote satanic verses, and a lot of Muslims took offense to what he said, who will say that I'm going to do exactly this. I'm not going to separate the art from the artist. And in my category of immoral things, this is immoral.
I'm going to interrupt you here, Deepak, because I feel that it is important to also therefore understand, like how we started off with the example of chess, piano, cycling, cricket, and then art, which is like your cinema. I think there is a degree to which certain things move you, and therefore there is a higher degree of expectation of the artist to be the least problematic, because a lot of people will have problematic traits to them.
Right.
But is your problematic trait that you show up late and you have no respect for someone's time? Or is it that you violate someone because you have the power to do that, and you feel that you can get away with it without any consequences? So I think there's that distinction that also needs to be made. And
Right.
therefore the threshold of your you will feel strongly about choosing an artist that you have asked the world to celebrate, if that problematic threshold, if it breaches that problematic threshold. And I think it should.
Yeah. And I think the way you're coming from, which I agree with, is because we
Let
end up.
us take a moment to say this on disagreeing with Deepak. Deepak has just said, I agree with you.
No, I do it a lot. I think the idea for the disagreement is something like we have to have some common platform.
Sure.
We have to get somewhere that we all agree and then see where we diverge. And insofar as you're saying this, I agree. Just to paraphrase what I would like view this as is that everybody has something that they consider the sacred, right? Like for most liberal types, individual autonomy is sacred. I own my own body, and it is inviolable, is sacred. And so this deep sense of revulsion that we get from people who, for example, like have sexual misconduct allegations against them, or even if it's proven, is that they violated the sacred.
Yeah.
The sacred is that we don't do this to each other. We don't treat each other as objects. Everybody has autonomy, right?
Yeah.
I'm saying that, and then from that you build your moral landscape. For lots of people in India, the sacred is actually the literal sacred. It is their God. It is their belief in their religion, in their temples, in their rituals, etc. To those people, Salman Rushdie or an M.F. Hussain have done exactly this. They have violated the sacred.
Or like a Djokovic basically refusing to get a vaccine and then sort of traveling.
That's such a great example. Yeah, it's a violation of the sacred, right? In that it is this the moral contract or the social contract.
Yeah, because you're hampering. I mean, in that case, you're actually putting other people's lives in danger by being by being irresponsible.
But you may also have the opposing side. So let's say you're somebody who does value autonomy. Then you will say that free speech and free expression are part of that autonomy. I want you to be able to have free expression in art.
No, but why I brought up Djokovic is because I think people who value that sport, a lot of them were very easy to forgive him and celebrate him in recent times. So I guess it's also the degree of which, I guess it's also about, when there is a person to, you're a perpetrator and then there is a victim and there is a face to that victim, which is a human being who's been violated. And that just, when you're able to see it at an individual level, I think it hits you and hurts you more because you have a certain expectation from the artist. When it is one to many and, this person basically put a lot of people's lives at risk. But do we know of a case of a person who caught COVID because of Djokovic? Do we know of someone who has died? I'm just wondering, why is it that that was something that a lot of people were just able to okay to sort of brush past, saying, yeah, guy's a prick. And he got away with it. People have celebrated him after that. And I think it is to do with the fact that there is no particular face of a person who was impacted by their action or inaction in this particular case. And therefore, it is easy for you to, after a point, overlook a lot of these things. So, again, going back to, because I don't think I did answer your question about if I were in an awards committee like that, how would I react? I think, you will basically, you will overlook a lot of these things that might be unacceptable to you. But you also, then we all come with a certain degree of acceptance that we are all flawed human beings. There are certain things that are unacceptable, and to you. But if another person is to do that, are you going to uh, punish them for it, because you now have the power to do that by deciding if their art is seen by other people? Like, am I not going to allow people to watch a Djokovic match in my house if they are? No. So, but would I want a certain actor's movies, be played in my house? Definitely yes, because if I've seen and heard and also very openly seen the kind of choices this actor has made in terms of the movies that they have acted in, or for a director, I'm taking the example of Animal, Ranbir Kapoor and Sandeep Vangareddy here. I get to decide there that I will not play your movies in my house. But will I listen to the music from those movies? Yeah, sure. So I guess you're also constantly sort of just deciding that, consumption.
You have to navigate your way through this.
Yeah, and in some, like in this case, I am being very clear that the music is actually so much more than just just these two people, and so I'm okay with that. Do I think it is am I being a hypocrite here? Sure, to some people that could be an argument, and I'm willing to accept that, because to me the music is evoking a lot more than just the memory of these two people, and so I am okay consuming it. I will still probably not celebrate it, but I will consume it.
Right. I'm trying to introduce one level of nuance here, where, so if you take something like sexual misconduct, almost everybody thinks that this is problematic. Like the number of people that you will find, irrespective of political, religious disposition, whatever it is, sexual misconduct and the violation of consent is problematic, just as a full stop statement, right? Now, I'm trying to think of topics where you don't have this broad consensus. And the reason I brought up the Salman Rushdie example or whatever is that on one side, you may say that you must be free to express your own artistic predispositions. So you should be allowed to paint a goddess naked, right? That you should be allowed to do that entirely. And on the other side, people will say, no, what is sacred to me is actually my God, my religion, my belief system is so fundamentally, it holds my society together, right? Okay, so they believe that is sacred. In this case, you'll see like entirely opposing boycotts. So on one side, people will boycott the art because they're saying, or will call out the art as being problematic and the artists being the source of that. And on the other side, you'll have people celebrating the art explicitly because it is a vessel for their belief system, which is that speech must be free and expression must be free and we should allow artists to do whatever they want. So I think those become more interesting again if you look at it from a formalism lens. If you then have to have an award ceremony and you have to make an objective call, now you know that there's a wide-ranging set of predispositions that people have, both pro and against. The artist's points of view, their choices, right? And then maybe the best thing that you can do as a panel at that point is to put aside all of these thoughts and say, let's look at the painting itself. Let's take an objective view of the brush strokes, the use of colors, dimensions, proportions, and take a call in a bubble, just given how many people on both sides exist who agree and disagree.
I think on that matter, you also have to understand that your decision also creates a certain chain of events. So when you are celebrating an art in silo, overlooking an artist's personality, you are still platforming that artist. You are giving the audience a chance to celebrate that artist. What that leads to is that artist being in the spotlight. You consume the art, you celebrate the art, you appreciate it, you then move on to the artist. And then you're giving that artist the chance to not only create more art, at and then basically risking the chance that at some point the artist's problematic side could start showing up in the art. And then because it's been widely accepted that we celebrate the art from this artist, you might create a situation where it might be difficult for people to even see that the art is now problematic because it started to mirror the problems of the artist. You're also giving the artist a mic to hold, because more and more people are keen to know who is this artist, and then that gives the artist a chance to kind of influence the people with their thought process. And you've already uh, certified that, okay, this is somebody we are accepting, widely accepting as someone who needs to be celebrated. And so for a lot of people, you are basically not giving them the chance to, if they're not able to kind of make up their mind on their own, you are telling them that whatever this person is saying is also to be celebrated, because we as people who know better have decided for you that we need to celebrate this person's art, and therefore giving them the platform to then propagate their ideology, which probably has nothing to do with the art. But by this time, you are not able to make the distinction in your head, because you are relying on people who know better than you to make that decision for you as to these are the people that we are platforming. We want you to see more of their art. We want you to hear more from these artists. And what that leads to is you then feeling responsible for creating a monster that is now widely celebrated and worshipped by people. And therefore, then you wish at some point, in history, I wish I could have stopped it at that point by being able to foresee a lot of this, that I will not be able to stop at a point when I've already built a god out of this person.
I'm very curious to know what the average listener thinks here. Like, I don't know if they're nodding along or they want to add some sentence. So this is one of those few podcasts where I feel like I'll have a wide set of people, giving me different kinds of responses.
100%.
I want to now dive into the moralism bit, talk about Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, talk about Animal, etc. But maybe we should take a quick break and then come back on the other side, and then we'll do all of this then.
Sounds good.
Hello, hi Shefali, welcome back.
Thank you, Deepak.
Okay, now we'll try the other side, okay? We've discussed viewing art separately in a silo as just a piece of technical something, and in that way separating the art from the artist, okay? Now the other side of the argument is the moralism side. We say that clearly the artist matters, is so interwoven with the art that we cannot separate the two. But, and then of course, this sounds like me making your argument, right? Like I'm on your side of the boat. But the way I want to use that to try and disagree with you is to say that we are all a product of our times. Like when I gave you the example for Kipling at the outset, Kipling was born and brought up in a world where imperialism was the norm.
Yeah.
Just like we view democracy as some ethical good, I'm sure he, in his heart of hearts, believed that imperialism was an ethical good. In that 200 years from now, the Indians will thank us for bringing to them civilization as opposed to the barbarism that they live in.
Yeah.
I have friends who frequently say that, like, the great evil of our times is that we eat animals. And in 200 years, they look back at us and will not be able to believe that we raise chicken in cages, treat them to such horrible lives, pump them full of hormones. And it is fundamentally unethical that we do this to other sentient beings. But we do it today, right? And in that way, with every artist, like Picasso lived in a time when it was okay to date with a larger age gap. With every artist, you would be in some way able to rationalize how they ended up there. And this could, like, philosophically be viewed as a no free will position, right? That all of us are Rolling Stones and there is only one way our life unfolds. Everything that happens is a consequence of something that's happened prior. At which point can we truly blame these people for who they became? I have a second extended part, which maybe we'll come back to second, but also that perhaps the art is not possible without that. In many cases, the art itself may not be possible without this damaged artist. So that's the way I want to push back, right? That should it negatively impact the art is my question.
I'd like to think that there is a nature versus nurture argument here that I would like to pose forward. Eating is an act of violence. So since you mentioned us eating animals and people from the future looking down upon us because of us having committed that act, there is no law of the humans, because laws are created by humans, right? That basically punishes an animal for eating a human being. There is nature's course that takes over then eventually. We're all a part of a food chain. And therefore, there is also a line between surrender versus, um, what you don't accept. You surrender to the laws of nature, which is all of us being a part of the food chain. And therefore, there are some things that you just can't help, which is why nature versus nurture. I think why I would want to look at the argument of us being a product of our times and therefore us not being held responsible for prop- propagating whatever that product is further, is that we as humans are evolving beings, and therefore you see now so many times where at least a handful of people would come up and say, hey, um, I used to be this person, and then I got exposed, and or I educated myself, or I had a lived experience that changed the way I felt about something, and now I know better. um, a lot of the problematic things that people do, I think there are cases where they think that it is normal because they have seen that
Hmm.
around them growing up. And yet, if there'd be times where you would see somebody who's been called out for something, and then they would say that, yeah, I mean, what is wrong with this thing that I've done? And you realize, okay, they don't even know what's wrong there.
Hmm.
And then there are times when they will deny having done that, which means that they know that this is wrong, but they've done it anyway because they thought that there won't be any consequences of it, because of the power that they have, because of the great art that they have created, which has made people celebrate the artist. I understand people being, when we are saying that we overlook some of their problematic aspects because they are the product of their times, what we are essentially saying that they are the victim of their times. And so, now that they are not, and if that is the case, then Kipling doesn't exist at this point. Picasso doesn't exist at this point. Their art does. And therefore, one of the points that you mentioned in your notes as well, right? So I think in those cases, you probably put that out there with context so that people can appreciate the art,
Hmm.
but are also informed about the artist. For them to know that there were certain artists who were like this in their real life, and I don't think we should overlook that, but we can also accept the fact that they created great art. It probably helps you understand human beings better, and it probably also then makes you understand the chain of why is it that so many artists, um, who create great art, end up being so problematic. Maybe it is because over centuries they have just not faced consequences and only seen celebration of their art. And therefore maybe it is imperative for for those of us who do hold morals in high regard to ensure that artists of today's day and age face consequences of their actions in their life, so that this norm, that so that we break those chains, so that for the future artists, that is not the norm that they take away, that you can do whatever you want in your life as long as you're creating great art. That is not what we want. We want to evolve, right? That's the whole point of evolution. We created great art as a Picasso and got away with all the shit that we put women in our lives through, but that stops now. And if an artist does that now, they will have to face consequences of it. Your great art is not going to protect you from the shit you pull in your real life. I think that is important because that is the whole point of evolution, that the artists of the future should see that the artists of their past faced consequences of their bad actions despite having made great art.
As I was researching for this, famously Hitler was an artist before he was a dictator. And so I was looking at Hitler's paintings. Right? I went through a whole bunch of paintings that we have that are certainly attributed to him having painted those. And there's one in specific, which is the moon over a midnight ocean, that I couldn't get my eyes off of. I was just looking at it and staring at it. And I felt like, I don't know if the fact that Hitler painted that painting repudiated the art as much as it deepened it. You know, like something about that being painted by somebody who was also capable of the Holocaust and the atrocities that came with the Second World War added something to the experience of looking at that painting. I don't know if what I specifically wanted at the end of it was that this painting should not be seen, or that we should replace it at a gallery with a less problematic artist, right? In fact, I may even argue that it should certainly be in the gallery, especially considering the atrocities that were committed. So that when you stand in front of it and you view it and you have the context of what happened, there is this grave feeling that descends upon you that you should feel. It adds to the art in some way. Do you feel like I'm making sense? Like you can call out poor behavior, but because art is a vessel for the artist in this, if we use the moralism viewpoint that the artist is not separable, all the more reason to provide context and have that context further influence the art.
Yeah, but see, like Hitler is such a good example here, right? Because Hitler's legacy is that of a monster, of somebody who is responsible for the Holocaust. He is responsible for mass genocide. In some conversations, it comes up that he was also a great orator, which also therefore made it easier for him to then become a dictator. So you don't celebrate his oratory skills. You are using it to describe it's like causation for how this person became the dictator that he was. His legacy is that of an out and out criminal, a horrible person. And in mythology you have that, right? You've had Ravan, who was very erudite, very learned, very well read, but the legacy is that of a villain. And I think that is the responsibility of people who are recording the works of art of these artists, right? To basically give you that context and then leave it to you to decide to what extent you consume it. Like in this case, you are consuming Hitler's art, but you're not celebrating the guy. Because the legacy, like you've grown up understanding that his legacy is not one that deserves or that is worthy of being celebrated. I think that is the responsibility of the chronicler of and curators and chroniclers of art and the stories of their artists, that you get to decide what is going to be the legacy of the artist behind that art, and therefore then leaving it to the audience to decide. And the audience has decided for Hitler long before you and I were born, that he is not someone that we celebrate, despite him being a great artist, because the acts that he has committed in his real life, the heinous quotient of those acts, it far outweighs some of the moving art that he may have made on the way while he was mass killing people without a sort of shred of remorse. And sorry, what was the question?
No, I think you've answered it well. So just to steelman what you're saying, because this is, I think, important for the listener to sort of like get. When we celebrate art, inevitably we're celebrating the artist, because the accolade cannot rest with a painting, a piece of movie, music, whatever. It has to go to a human being.
Yeah.
And
you will invariably look up the artist behind the art, because it's not enough for you to just be okay with just celebrating the art. You as a human being are bound to look up the artist. You want to celebrate the artist behind the art.
And so that's the problem with the formalism approach, because even if you're even if you're trying to be as objective as possible and celebrate only the art,
Yeah.
ultimately the celebration is...
Because it's a human being that has created it, and there is a part of you that feels like, oh, I am incapable of creating this, but this is something that another human created, something that made me feel. We're all begging to feel things, right?
Then further, the celebration of the artist is often viewed as a celebration of the artist's character. That is, when you celebrate somebody, it rarely happens in a silo. You don't say that Shefali is only an incredible journalist, but rather is incredible as a consequence of what I can see in her journalism and must likely carry forth to other parts of her life. Then upon discovering the person is problematic in ways that are beyond the art or outside the art, must then impact the person.
Yeah,
that
and
sounds
you
like
also hear so many people say that, right? This person, you kind of accept that. I say that about while describing a lot of people. This person is a great journalist, but a shit human being, and so I don't want to have to do anything with them in my personal life. But if they are winning accolades for their journalism, I will probably celebrate their journalism, but I would obviously make sure to clarify that it is their journalism that I'm celebrating. And then within that also there are degrees, right? If this is just a shit human being who doesn't respect other human beings, or is opportunistic, or are they malicious, or are they people who have violated other people's existence? Are they just disrespectful? Are they dishonest? Are they unreliable as people? Because if they're unreliable, you also then therefore imply journalism is also a business. We're in the business of truth telling, right? Because you mentioned journalism as an example.
Yeah.
There are so many degrees for you to then decide, how am I, when I'm talking about this person to others who may not know anything about this person beyond their work, to then give other people a holistic picture of this person and then let them decide to what degree do they want to celebrate this person's work. And you do that so often because you are in the business of not just telling the truth. Your business as a journalist, your profession, because of your profession, you are also exposed to different facets of people that the world celebrates. And then it does become your duty to give people a holistic picture of a person and then let them decide where their morality lies. You are in the business of recording people's legacy. You are in the business of letting other people decide what is going to be the legacy of an artist. You have to do that responsibly.
I want to try and use the Harry Potter story as a way to discuss the death of the author. So the death of the author is a famous essay by Barthes, where he's arguing that, and this reminds me of, I think it's called deconstructionism, if I'm not wrong. It's like this philosophy that argues that it's impossible for me to be able to communicate with you in exactitude that which I am thinking, because there is loss of information at multiple points. So for example, when I write it down, I may not be able to write in full capacity that which I feel or want to communicate. And then when you read it, you may not understand what I actually intended for you to read. And then your assimilation of it, right? And so just transference of something from my brain to yours has some amount of information loss that takes place. And crucial in this is the viewer, the listener, the person who consumes the art. You have your own moral framework, your own way of looking at the world, influenced by the zeitgeist of your culture, your upbringing, nature, nurture, all of the things that we've spoken about. And the essay argues that the minute the book is opened, or the first line of the poem is read, or the painting is glanced upon, the author has died. And it is the birth of the consumer, the reader, the person who appreciates the piece of art, that causes the death of the author. And immediately you mix that piece of art with you. And it then no longer is something that you can attribute to the author solely. In fact, in large part, the author is fully eliminated, and you are intersposed into that piece of art. And in this case, to be able to apply that to you as a person, you place context about the artist as an important aspect of the art itself. That is a moral position that lies in you. It's not objective anywhere else. And because you bring it with you and you put that into the art, right? Where you say, I want to know more about the artist and their moral positions and their indiscretions, and you add that into the art. You have forever. This has nothing to do with the artist. In fact, all it has to do with is you as the viewer, right? Okay, so I want to use pop culture as a way to just bring it to earth. The Harry Potter problem is that many of the Harry Potter fans grew up with Harry and Ron and Hermione, and didn't know about many of the beliefs that J.K. Rowling held. Whether or not you agree with it is a separate question, but many of them do disagree with it, and felt quite torn between um, what they love as a piece of art that they grew up with, and
Yeah.
now the fact that they know that their author is, for example, has views on trans issues that they don't agree with. And this essay would argue that it never mattered.
Yeah.
The author died long before you had any context. Okay, back to you. I said a lot of things, but how do you feel about this?
I would argue that the author doesn't even exist, or the artist doesn't even exist when you start consuming an art. It's also the gestation period of art in general. Like a book is an art form that you're engaging with for a longer period of time. And therefore, the artist, to my mind, the moment you read the first line is when the artist is conceived instead of when the artist has died. Because through the course of the book, you're more and more eager to understand who the artist is behind this art. It also depends on who is the person who's consuming, right? Like if I'm reading a book about an author that I've never heard of, the premise interested me, I picked the book up, and I'm liking the book halfway through. I think the more I like the art, the more curious I will grow about the artist. So I would argue, Deepak, that the artist is only getting conceived while in your mind when you're consuming art. And by the end of by the time your consumption journey is over, the artist is this child that is born, and now you want to basically know everything about the journey of the artist.
Yeah, I can relate to that actually. I pick up a book, I fall in love, and then
only then do I care to know anything about the artist, because I am so intrigued by that art. I want to know who's the artist behind this art. How much of, so many times when we speak to filmmakers or even writers who are fiction writers, one of the most basic, obvious questions we ask them is how much of you is in this particular character. And so often, or almost always, it's the main character that we are asking them about, right? Not the supporting cast, because we kind of believe, and it turns out to be true on most days, that the artist is projecting, the central character based on things that have happened in their lives. So many artists we know like that, right? Even though they've been writing fiction, that the central character is one that mirrors so many of their own personalities or their own struggles or their own journey. So I would argue that from the moment you start reading the first line of the book, you are creating that artist. You begin creating that artist in your head from that point onwards. And by the end of it, the artist is fully formed. And now you want to just look at what has been formed and try and see what are the similarities between your imagination and the real person.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
I think we construct the artist in the way we construct the characters.
Yeah.
So every one of the protagonist, the antagonist, all
we
the
are
supporting
constructing
stuff.
the artist based on the a constructed structure that's already been presented to us.
That's really interesting. I agree. I do the same thing. I think when I read, where if I don't know the artist already, as the book progresses, they will form into some sort of a shape.
Yeah.
And it's
Or
probably
it's largely guesswork.
Exactly, it's unfair also.
Yeah,
right?
you're
Because,
guessing.
yeah.
You're guessing. Okay, this is what I think. The artist behind this is. Or
Would be
sometimes
like,
you're
yeah.
just curious. Okay, who is this person really who has created this kind of work? Sometimes you're guessing, and sometimes you want to know because you just can't guess.
Is that unfair? Is it unfair that we are creating this artist who doesn't exist? It's like you're creating an archetype for a collection of positive values, right? Rarely are you making a horrible person up in your head.
I don't know whether it is unfair or unfair. I only know that this is human. This is what we do.
As a fact of the process of what we do.
Yeah, we can't help it, can we?
As you were talking, I was thinking about Banksy. Most of his art appears on the private property or the public property of somebody else, right? Most recently, of course, like a courthouse. But through history, Banksy's painted on other people's walls. In effect, he's a vandal. It is illegal. And most classic liberals will argue immoral because you cannot deface my property. It's literally the definition of what it means to have property is that it's inviolable.
I'm not sure if it's immoral as it is unlawful.
No, but let's say that you have a house, and I came and changed the color of your house. You'd say, look, this is my private property. In fact, it's one of those few inviolable things.
Again, I think object versus bodies, right? Like something that is personal versus something that is private. I think immoral is you violating someone's body, and that is unlawful as well. I am not sure if vandalism is immoral. It is definitely unlawful. it becomes immoral if it is obviously done to deface someone, to if it is harassment, if you're basically uh, you know calling someone names and basically like painting their car with those names. That is both unlawful and immoral. If you are picking the most expensive building in a rich suburb, and you're putting out some sort of truth, that is also vandalism, that is also unlawful. Is it immoral though, or is it dissent?
This is beautiful. I mean, it may so be dissent, and it can be both things. Because the
And
moral,
it is still unlawful. You will
Yeah,
be
yeah.
punished for it. There should be consequences for it still.
right. But I just want to try and push on the immoral bit, because the way we construct a moral framework, usually a legal framework is built on moral frameworks, right? We arrive at private property through the ownership of our bodies. We say that because I own my body, I own my labor, and because I own my labor, this is a classic liberal argument. I don't know if, I'm not saying I specifically agree, but this is the classic liberal argument. Because I own my labor, I own the fruits of my labor. So, for example, why was the demonetization problematic? One of the philosophical problems with the demonetization was that it was an attack on private property.
Yeah.
You own the notes in your physical wallet. The state doesn't. They can't force you to come back and swap things, because it's inviolable. It's private property. You own it. I can't demonetize your currency. It is by definition yours and not mine, right? Because you owned that money. The state didn't. The state may have issued it, but they didn't own it. So philosophically, I can see, but I'm able to understand the other side. Like, I don't know if I feel the rage build within me when I see graffiti. I don't. By and large, I'm like, yeah, cool, okay. It's somebody attempting to do their art. Get a pack of white paint and clean it, and let the cops deal with the outfall of it.
Yeah.
But I could argue that it ought to be immoral. It's, I don't know if I'm making sense. Okay, so but this is a whole side track. Back to Harry Potter. What do you think we do? Now, I don't know how you feel about Harry Potter. Maybe you love the franchise and the books, maybe you don't. But just as a thought experiment, let's say that you grew up with it and you love it.
I did grow up with it, and not the books, the movies, because I grew up as a nerdy child who was buried into textbooks. I actually did not read a lot of books outside of textbooks growing up. So a lot of people around me find it very odd that I am a reader, but I've actually not read Harry Potter. I've only watched the movies multiple times. And yes, up until the time that J.K. Rowling said a lot of obnoxious things about human beings, I was very openly celebratory of that universe as well. And now I'm not openly celebratory of that universe. Interestingly, I haven't also consumed, because I did do a lot of repeat watching of Harry Potter in my adult years, like in my late 20s, but not since she's made those comments. For some reason, I did watch that that reunion thing that they had, and I remember film critic Sucharita Tyagi pointing this out, that would have been nice to at least have an acknowledgement of the fact that that there was this controversy. Or no, wait, she actually pointed that out for the Friends reunion, not the Harry Potter reunion. But I think that same thing applies to the Harry Potter cast reunion as well, that there was just no acknowledgement of the fact that this happened. So
what was the problematic part of Friends?
it hasn't aged well, no? A lot of the things, like just the Ross being the nerd but being bullied by everyone instead of being celebrated for actually being the only one who's probably properly studied in that entire group, and valued sort of knowledge, and knew so much about a certain field of education that so many of us don't know. And one man kind of just objectifying women and just sort of still being celebrated throughout, or you just basically being okay with that and still accepting the guy and embracing the guy and kind of celebrating the guy. Joey is the one that I'm talking about. A lot of things about that show, there is like there's Loki fat shaming, there's a bunch of things that haven't kind of aged well. And
Got it.
none of that was kind of forget addressing, even acknowledged in the reunion.
Understood. Okay, so on the Harry Potter question, now let's assume that you did love it. To the extent where, and a lot of Harry Potter fans do this, you started indulging in the fandom. right? So you start writing offshoot stories.
Yeah.
You are building art on top of this art.
Mm.
You're like so engaged and you love these characters so much. And to be fair, uh, JK did a lot of work on, so a lot of the characters were gay
Yeah.
or fairly progressive, especially given the times that she wrote these books in. And it's targeted at children. So it's this wonderful magical land where anything can happen. And the fans treat it like that. Anything does happen, right? Now, do you stop participating in the fandom? Or do you say that I'm taking ownership of this art? In effect, what I'm saying is I'm claiming this from the author.
Yeah.
The author may be problematic in my point of view, and that's perfectly fine. But the art has progressed so far beyond the author. It means so much to so many people in ways that the author never even originally imagined, that it doesn't matter at this point what JK said or didn't say. I am claiming the art. It is now mine. And I continue to celebrate and appreciate it and build on top of it. And what the author did is no longer a factor that I'm going to, as in, I'm not going to allow the actions of the author to ruin the art for me.
Okay, here's what I have done in these instances, and it clearly shows a pattern with me where clearly it bothers me when the artist says or does something, more than saying, does something that kind of implicates them in certain ways. I'll give you an example of a very popular Korean music group, without naming them. I'm sure even if I don't name them, it's still as good as sort of mentioning who it is that I'm talking about. A few years ago, I used to very openly be a fan of that particular, like a very public fan of that group, until a certain point where a journalist pointed out that they have an anthology out in which they have picked some songs. One of the songs that they've picked has a music producer who has been found guilty of sexual predation twice over, and horrifying stuff. Why would you choose to keep this song in your anthology when you could have picked any other song? That journalist was trolled by the fandom very publicly for just asking this question. I think it's a very valid question. And you're at this point not even holding them responsible for something. You're just asking a question at this point. You're just seeking some sort of accountability. And that to me was unacceptable. That your fandom or your association, your parasocial relationship with this group is so big that you've forgotten everything else that that one should probably value as a human being. And I think it's very clear to me that you either take a stand for these things if you've had a lived experience that makes you feel as strongly about these things, or you have the ability to put yourself in the shoes of those people and feel how that violation must have felt like, and therefore you feel that okay, it is important to take a stand about these things, or you just understand the importance of, and then they came for me, and therefore you understand the importance of speaking up, and so you seek accountability of people who are in a position of power, asking them, why did you think this action was okay? I am giving you a chance to enlighten me as to why you think it was okay. You could actually change my mind about these things, but I am well within my duty as a journalist to ask that question of you. I have since that moment not publicly spoken about consuming music of said band. And immediately I had also kind of removed some of the playlists that I had of that band, but then some of their songs were included in my larger playlist, and every once in a while they continue to sort of shuffle, continues to throw them. I was listening to some of their songs as of this morning. In fact, the last song that was playing right now before you and I met was a song by this particular group, and I'm okay sort of consuming that. I just don't share that publicly anymore because I feel like they just got away with not having to explain themselves and their decision because they had a huge fandom backing them, which made it harder for the journalist to question them.
I hear where you're coming from.
Hmm.
What I'm trying to instead get to the heart of is
Hmm.
if I can, so in the Harry Potter example,
Hmm.
if I can explicitly publicly state that
Hmm.
yes, I do have a problem with this artist.
Yeah.
In fact, what she said is problematic, right? Let's say I believe in those
So
things,
yeah,
so I
so
say
to
that.
answer your question, I think it's the threshold, like it's just how deeply do I feel about something like this, and also how much bandwidth do I have, because taking a stand about a lot of things on the internet also results in a lot of it's a time sink basically after a point. And
Hmm.
so you basically decide, do I have the bandwidth for it? And that you will basically decide, you will do certain things, like you will publicly say, okay, listen, I am putting this out there that I have a problem with this behavior. I am not going to talk about whether or not I am going to still consume that art, because that's my prerogative. But there will be certain things that will push you to that point where you will feel morally responsible to actually say it out loud, because you understand that, like I was telling you in the break, right? Varun Grover had said this in a panel, that I have a mic right now, and with that comes this responsibility that I know there are people listening to me. And so it is important that I speak up when I think that there is something of note that needs to be spoken up.
Right. But in effect, then you're separating art and artist. Where you're getting ultimately is you're saying that I have a problem with this person and the way that they have behaved, whether publicly or privately.
Hmm.
I'm acknowledging that.
Hmm.
But
I'm not separating. No, then I'm saying that I am going to basically link the artist with the art, and then that the artist's actions are going to determine how I view the art, how I consume the art, and whether or not I celebrate the art.
but what I'm saying in the Harry Potter fandom world is actually the opposite. What they're saying is,
They are separating for sure.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're saying that if you
So,
were in the same position,
in the same position, yes, I have but then that's what I said, right, Deepak? So you're making decisions across these three parts, where are you even if you're saying that you're separating the art and the artist, you're only doing it to the extent of consumption. When you're not choosing to celebrate it, or whenever it comes up in public, you're actually choosing to talk about the context.
yeah, that feels like the key distinction. The
Yeah,
consumption
yeah.
versus
You
the.
are being responsible to the extent that you feel that you have the responsibility. And I am also speaking as a journalist here, right? I am a chronicler of our times, and therefore it is my responsibility to the extent possible that I give you context to to a person who's a person of interest of our times.
And if I have a few questions here. So
Hmm.
let's say that I am continuing to consume the art
Hmm.
with no celebration of the artist,
Hmm.
right? Because I have a problem with the artists themselves.
Hmm.
But now decided to, like, I enjoyed so much that
Yeah.
I want to write the chronicles of the life of Ron and Hermione post the Deathly Hallows, right?
Hmm.
So then I'm now adding to this.
Hmm.
Is my participation and further evolution of the art
Hmm.
something that can be misconstrued as celebration, because that becomes public, that becomes other people appreciating it. More people get sucked into this world of Harry Potter as a consequence of my work.
Yeah. So I think is just that to me is easy, Deepak. I feel that if I've already done that, I may not feel as glad about that work. Like I gave you the example of that content creator whose mother I interviewed, right? I will obviously never share that interview now, because I see it differently now. I am not very proud of it. I wish I had known that about that creator, producer / media person back then. I don't think I will be able to sort of, if I watch something that they created back then, I don't think at this point, having the knowledge of everything, I don't think still I can still love those characters and the emotions that they've evoked inside of me. But to build my own art on top of that, I think for me would not be possible, because I can now just appreciate that art while knowing very well that the artist is a problematic person. I don't think I will be able to create art on top of that.
And if you feel so personally about that universe,
Yeah.
and then she were to write a follow-on book
Hmm.
that adds to the universe in some way,
Hmm.
right? That puts, I feel, the consumer in a very hard spot, because they care about the universe.
Hmm.
They're bought into this entire story. All the individual characters, although fictional,
Hmm.
are deeply meaningful to them.
Hmm.
I mean, that's the whole point of art, that you feel emotionally related to the
Okay,
material.
actually, let's just take this as an example. If there is a Harry Potter Part 9,
Hmm.
uh, you know, or There was this play as well, right?
Yeah, she did a bunch of things in the Harry
Yeah,
Potter universe after that. Yeah.
yeah. So it just so happens that I have not consumed any of it. But if any of that were to come, I will consume it. I think I'm very clear about that. Even with the music group that I speak of, if they do come up with something new, I don't think I'll be as eager. But that's also because it's a function of time. Much time has passed, and I think my tastes have evolved, and um, some of that artwork is just now a part of nostalgia that you will go back to, and you will reminisce the time and who you were at the time when you liked this art. But I don't think my association will be as strong. I will not be as excited about either of them, and that is not just to do with the uh, who they represent as people now. It is also to do with how your association with that art and how it moved you. I think as a by virtue of that being tainted because of what this person said, and if you are someone who does feel a lot strongly about things in general, if you're a feelings person, it anyway sort of ebbs at just how that art made you feel. I've just not had the bandwidth to watch Harry Potter again for me to know how that would make me feel. Whether I would think of, okay, what are the obnoxious things that this person said about real people when she has created such great fictional people. It could also be that I might actually now see that art very differently, and I might see the othering in that of certain characters, and whether these are the things that I never noticed, but now that I probably have a better understanding of the artist, I might see the art very differently and very much more critically
Hmm.
because I know the artist now. So there is that possibility as well. In this case, I just haven't had the chance to go back and do that. But I remember recently reading that in someone was actually making that case that now that I know these things about J.K. Rowling and I go back and revisit either the books or the movies, I see some of those things that basically that are able to reflect that the personality of this artist, and that makes you view that art very differently. And that again ties back to my point about how when you reflect on your younger self and the things that the beliefs that the younger self held so dearly, and you don't anymore, that is also evolution, right? I think all of this is just connected to evolution. There was a time when we were celebrating the art and not giving a damn about the artist behind the art, but we know better now, and therefore we contextualize, and then we leave it to the beholder to decide in the manner in which they want to appreciate the art and the artist. And we decide for ourselves how we are letting the artists conduct affect how their art impacts us.
I normally end every podcast with the steel woman, steel
Mm.
man,
Mm.
that I ask the guest to hold.
Mm.
But before that, I wanted to share that the way the podcast format works is I usually ask the guest, what do you believe in?
Mm.
And then I'm happy to take the opposing stance.
Mm.
And the kinds of things people come up with are across the entire spectrum, right?
Mm.
All the way from somebody believes something about technology and policy or AI something,
Mm.
all the way to like free speech, free expression, right? Just philosophical positions that they believe in.
Mm.
I think this is the first one that I have done where it's not a philosophical first position
Mm.
because usually a philosophical position involves an ought. I do this, one ought to do it, right? This is the way it has to be,
Mm.
and an a priori, you would argue it in that way. And it's not like a policy. You're not saying that I want the state to intervene.
Yeah.
I think you're making like um, a case for how one should feel about something that has always been a deeply personal subject, right?
Yeah.
Like my relationship with me and the art,
Mm.
and like why this being a vessel for the artist matters and why it should be interesting. So this was like a new format for me as well, and I really enjoyed like recording this on the whole.
Mm.
I'm also like very curious to hear what listeners say, and I'll forward to you if anyone ever writes something to me, right? So you're also in the loop.
Mm.
But I think it'll be fun. I think this is like different enough that I think we'll hear like a nice wide band of people writing back about different things, because I don't feel like there are objective answers here, but there
Yeah.
are great cases to be made for different things, contextually depending on what's exactly happening in the moment.
I would just say I'm sure there are no easy answers here. And that is why even for me, it's just so different with the way I have reacted um, to the art versus the artist debate, depending on what kind of art it is. what kind of conduct from the artist that we are talking about. And like you said, right, like were they the product of their times? And therefore, I think it just boils down to just how forgiving are we of the artist's conduct. And when we basically visit their art for the first time, having known about the artist's conduct, versus revisit their art after having known about the artist's conduct in a way that we accept to be true.
Hmm. Which then brings me to the demand. Can you present the other side here?
Hmm.
You certainly won't do it emotionally, because emotionally you don't feel that way.
Yeah.
But if you had to sit in my place, we had to hold a Shefali disagrees, and I believed in this, and you had to hold the opposing side. What do you think the best cases for that? By and large, we actually should separate art and artist.
I think the best case could just be that, um, well, I already do disagree with myself, in the sense that I actually do make it easier for myself to kind of be lenient in terms of the consumption versus celebration part. So I do draw the line there itself, where I'm okay consuming, in some cases just not celebrating. And in some cases, I will just put the context out there, while both consuming and celebrating. Um, or rather, not celebrating, but just sort of chronicling. So to that extent, I think I am being very lenient myself with the decision making that one is doing in this case. On the other side, if I were to be on the other side, I would understand if someone doesn't feel as deeply. I do understand not everyone feels as deeply as I do about a lot of things. I don't feel as deeply about a lot of things as somebody else may do. Um, and I wouldn't say that I'm fine with that, but it's something that you got to live with. Uh, And so if someone thinks that, oh, you just take this too seriously, it's not all that serious, I would I would say sure. If that's what works for you, it doesn't work for me. And therefore I get to decide how I get to choose how I am consuming and chronicling and celebrating art. That's my prerogative. It's your prerogative to do as you please. So that could be one argument. The other could just be that there is such little good art in the world, um, which is what people say, right? Every time you're talking to people and you tell them, oh, you know what, this one was also called out, and they go, yaar, kuch bacha hi nahi hai. Like, what are we going to enjoy? Because it seems like everybody has just basically violated someone or the other. Well, that's not entirely true. I think there is also a sampling bias here at play. We should probably, every time we're talking about a bunch of people in a particular field who have been called out for misconduct of any kind, we should probably have a list ready of a bunch of people who may have their follies, but have kind of made sure that their conduct is intact, so that we can also strengthen our argument by saying that you can be a damaged person and then basically create art out of your pain, but you don't have to. You being a damaged person doesn't give you the license to damage other people in the name of creating good art. That is unacceptable. You had no control over the damage that you have gone through, but you have control over your actions. So there are certain things that can are justifiable and certain things that are not. So yeah, so that is the other argument that I hear from the other side, right? Like, what art will be left, if to consume and celebrate, if we start looking at the moral conduct of every artist. Well, no, there are a lot of artists whose moral conduct is um, pretty decent and not questionable or objectionable. So yes, there is ample amount of art that you can celebrate without having to question the morality of the artist behind it. um, I just realized that therefore I'm actually not uh, putting myself in their shoes. I'm still sort of
No, but
countering their argument.
at least prior to countering, you made the case.
Yeah.
For what
So
what they
if
have to
they
say.
were to make that case, this is what I will say to that. But okay, maybe let me actually think of a very genuine case that I can make on the other side. Is that you just never know, right? You will probably never know what the truth is. I guess if someone were to say that to me, that
Innocent until guilty.
yeah, then I would just say that, yeah, I go with my gut. I think this is something that I hold in high regard. And I do believe that even if there are 5 people who are influenced by my choices, I choose to withhold the celebration of this art, or I think it is imperative that I chronicle that there is this context to this artist behind this art that's being celebrated. And now I leave it to your discretion to decide your choice of consumption, chronicling, and celebration.
Shefali, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Deepak.